we're thrilled to be partnering with UCL Culture's Petri Museum for today's event. For those who don't know, the Petri Museum is home to one of the most significant collections of Egyptian and Sudanese archaeology in the world. This extraordinary collection tells the stories of the lives of ordinary people who lived along the Nile Valley thousands of years ago.
The Petrie Museum of Egyptian and Sudanese Archaeology is part of University College London. The Petrie Museum has one of the most important and largest collections of ancient and modern objects from Egypt and Sudan anywhere in the world. We tell extraordinary stories about ordinary people who lived along the Nile Valley thousands of years ago. We have over 80,000 objects in this collection from Egypt and Sudan. We have the oldest known, most complete garment in the world, which is more than 5,000 years old. We also have one of the first representations of weaving, and we also have the oldest known will on paper. We are open to the public, everybody is welcome, and the museum is free to visit. The Petrie Museum is an extraordinary collection of thousands of objects. Every time you come here, you'll see something new.
Fantastic. So in this event, we're going to hear about the story of the cast of characters who were influential in creating the museum. We're delighted to be joined by the curator, Dr. Anna Garnett, and the head of collection, Katrina Wilson, in this behind-the-scenes look at the museum and the untold stories behind its formation.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. It's so wonderful to be here with you today, especially in such an enormous group. And as we said, as everyone was joining, this is way beyond anything that we could host in the museum. So this is really exciting for both of us. In January 2019, the Petrie Museum was awarded major project funding by DCMS Wolfson Museum and Galleries Improvement Fund to transform the museum's entrance gallery, and that's what we're going to introduce to you today. In this private view, Anna and I will explore the background to the Petrie Gateway project and introduce you a little to the museum for those who've never been, or reacquaint anyone who misses it as much as we do. You will meet our cast of characters, some of the men, women, and children whose efforts brought this museum into being, as well as the objects that we selected to display these stories. We'll show you behind the scenes and give you a window into some of the collection's care and conservation work that was carried out during the project. And last but not at all least, we'll unveil to you today the newest object to be added to the Petrie Museum collection and tell you all about the hidden love story behind it. And so, here is our cast. Ooh. This afternoon, Anna and I are going to introduce you to this incredible set of people. Each one has a key part to play in bringing the Petrie Museum into being and has an incredible story to tell. You'll note that one of the set is Anna herself, and Anna, of course, has a crucial role today as curator of the collection, and we're extraordinarily lucky to have her with us. It's really important to say here as well that these are by no means the only people involved in the formation and development of what has become the Petrie Museum. The museum represents the work of many hundreds, even thousands of people, none more so than the Egyptian and Sudanese people who are involved in excavating the majority of the objects. As you'll hear from Anna in a moment, the Petrie Museum was founded to be a teaching collection for UCL. It was designed to teach about object and material types on mass scale, and it continues in this vein today. Anyone who's visited will be familiar with the Petrie Museum of a Museum style displays. And this style is something that our supporters love and I personally adore, but can be a little difficult for some visitors to understand unless you're a specialist or you have a little bit of help to get into the information. The museum opened to the public as well in 1915, and we consider the general public and some specific audiences, so for example, Egyptian and Sudanese people and the friends of the museum, many of whom are here this afternoon, hello, to be a core audience for us. We have a well-established varied program of events and activities for our public audiences that sit alongside our academic teaching activities and research. And we receive a vast number of research inquiries every year from colleagues all over the world who access the collections through on-site visits in more normal years, as well as remotely. And the fact that the Petrie Catalogue has been online since the early 2000s plays a substantial and crucial role in this. In fact, we think it was the first museum in the world to have the whole catalogue online.
So a key focus of the project was to shed light on some of the more complex issues relating to the history of the collection, to the legacies of its founders, and foregrounding the importance of the Egyptian workforces, who were essentially the hidden hands behind the collection. This work builds on important previous work by our colleagues Stephen Quirk, Debbie Chalice, Alice Stevenson, and Sabadra Das, among others, who over the past decade have worked hard to bring these hidden and more controversial stories to a wider audience. We thank these scholars for their vital work on this aspect of the history of the collection, and we're fortunate to have the opportunity to build on these stories in the new displays. We're also happy to share further details of these publications in the chat today. We'll pop some links in there. So this is our old entrance gallery. So for more than 20 years, displays in our entrance gallery have not always been coherent, which means that visitors are not greeted with clear, consistent messages and language when they enter the museum, which sometimes led to confusion for the rest of their visit. The space is very narrow and it could only really comfortably accommodate 2 or 3 people at any one time, leading to unavoidable visitor bottlenecks, which affected the quality of their visit.
So this is our brand new entrance gallery. Oh, how I wish we were all standing there right now, although if we were, we'd be breaking every COVID secure rule imaginable, so perhaps it's best that we're not. We hope that our new entrance provides a clearer and more impactful introduction to the Petrie collection, a way in for visitors to understand the context of what they're about to see. We hope this work has significantly improved the overall experience at the museum by offering a more balanced, engaging, and accessible introduction to the collection for all visitors. This major redesign of the entrance has created a dedicated space to tell the story of Petrie and Edwards together at the museum for the first time, while also revealing other hidden hands behind the collection. Key messages in the gallery include: why is there an ancient Egyptian and Sudanese collection at UCL? Why were people able to remove objects from Egypt and Sudan to make this collection? And what is the colonial and imperial history of the collection? This more physically and intellectually accessible gateway space offers visitors the chance to acquaint themselves with key characters from the museum before moving into the main galleries to see the stunning results from Petrie's excavations. Through this honest reinterpretation of the museum's history, informed by representatives of our key stakeholder groups, we aim to fulfill our ethical responsibility to deal with provocative and complex issues in a transparent way.
So the development of the object list, the different themes, and the choice of characters was guided by our key stakeholder groups, which Katrina mentioned. This includes UCL students and staff, external partners, including relating to issues around physical access, and importantly, Egyptian and Sudanese colleagues, who we were also able to engage with via social media. You'll see a tweet here that I posted at the beginning of the project. This process also included visitor surveys via audience agency with support of front of house colleagues, and we'll pick this up again when the museum is open for visitors more frequently. This aspect of the project was truly a collaborative effort. We couldn't have done it without all these people, and we're incredibly grateful for their guidance and their support. As Katrina mentioned, we aimed for improvements to physical as well as intellectual access with the project. A formal access audit was commissioned at the start of the project, which determined how we should approach these improvements in physical accessibility. This helped us to shape the project and respond with the funding, but more importantly, it gives us a roadmap for the future. This included an assessment of entry routes into the Petri Museum, as well as the museum space itself as you enter from the exterior. The entry routes to the museum have now been improved, meaning that the entrance gallery is now much more accessible to visitors who use a wheelchair. Improved wayfinding measures and welcome areas also create a much more pleasant experience for visitors. Now, we'd like to talk a little bit about some of the characters behind the collection whose stories we chose to tell in the new entrance gallery. The project was entitled Petrie and Edwards, Gateway to the World of Egyptology. So we initially focused on telling the stories of 2 key characters. The first of these is Amelia Edwards. Amelia was the founder of the collection. She was a writer, a journalist, an activist, and a passionate advocate for Egyptian archaeology. She visited Egypt in 1871 and she became hooked, as many of us do, as many of us have. She wrote her memoir of her visit and dedicated the rest of her life to supporting Egyptian archaeology. So Amelia had her own collection of ancient Egyptian objects. We think around 1,000 objects, and these were acquired both through excavation and through purchase. We have a description from Amelia herself of her collection. She says, "Dearer to me than all the rest of my curios are my Egyptian antiquities. And of these, strange to say, though none of them are in sight, I have enough to stock a modest little museum. Stowed away in all kinds of nooks and corners, in upstairs cupboards, in boxes, drawers, and cases innumerable, behind books, and invading the sanctity of glass closets and wardrobes, and hundreds, nay thousands of these fascinating objects, in bronze and glazed ware, in carved wood and ivory, in glass and pottery and sculptured stone, which are the delight of archaeologists and collectors." So this is Amelia describing the collection in her own home, but she bequeathed the collection to UCL on her death in 1892. And this collection formed the basis for the Petri Museum as we know it today. This also included her Egyptological library. Importantly, Amelia also set up the first professorship for Egyptian archaeology and philology in the UK at UCL on her death in 1892. We chose to include several of these objects in the new displays, where they can be properly showcased in the context of the Edwards collection. So, Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. I'm sure many of you have heard of him, and if you haven't, then this is your opportunity to learn more. He's well known as the father of Egyptian archaeology, but he has a complex legacy, and the museum is named after him. Petrie is known for developing archaeology from a treasure hunt into a science, and much of his work formed the basis for archaeological practice, which is still in use today. Petrie was the first Edwards professor at UCL, being appointed on Amelia Edwards' death in 1892. And of course, Petrie is also a big part of this project. While much of the Petri Museum collection comes from Petrie's excavations in Egypt, relatively little of his own personal story is told in the Petri Museum displays. And we wanted to change that with the new entrance gallery. So, for example, we included objects from Petrie's personal collection that have not been displayed before. His excavation satchel, which you can see here in the middle, it has his name written on ink inside, one of my favorite objects, and his digging tool. These give a sense of the person for visitors, and not only the vast collection of ancient Egyptian objects that he amassed during his lifetime. We also included other objects in the new displays to highlight these more controversial stories behind the collection, as Katrina mentioned. Petrie's involvement in the development of eugenics at UCL and his approach to the racial stereotyping of ancient peoples in particular continues to influence our understanding today. And it's important that we hold these legacies to account. For example, he described this object, which is now on display in the entrance, which is a clay head. To him, this object represented a Kurd, and he described the object in generalizing and racist terms as such. The Kurd has the cross turban, which belongs to the Central Asian and Kurd race, but not to the Semitic peoples. The type of face agrees to that of the modern Kurds. This is very problematic, and it's just one example of such a kind of an object with more controversial background and story that we've chose to highlight in the new display. Another is Amelia Edwards' memoir, 1,000 Miles Up the Nile. In this book, Amelia Edwards used language which is now considered racist and highly inappropriate to describe modern Egyptian people. We've included a copy of this book in the new displays, and we're trying to share a more holistic view of Amelia's background, moving away from the idea of hero worshipping, which remains commonplace in Egyptology today.
The Egyptian and Sudanese men, women, and children who excavated many of the objects in this collection only recently began to be recognised for their work and contribution to archaeology. This is something that we considered essential to include in the new displays. I should also say here that this is not a new thing for the Petri Museum at all, but instead builds on the work of people like Stephen Quirk that Anna mentioned earlier, For example, you can see on the bottom left on your screen a photograph of a man called Hussein Osman with a tomb group, a selection of objects that we know he excavated from one tomb. Many of these workers became some of the world's first specialist field archaeologists, and their descendants continue to work on field projects in Egypt today. An area called Guft was renowned for particular expertise in organizing and managing excavations, and descendants of these Guftis, as they became known, take a great deal of pride in their archaeological heritage. The workers also included children, excuse me, and here are two teenage Egyptian workers at Flinders Petrie's excavation at the site of Tanis in 1882. On the left is Ahmed Hefnawi and a young girl on the right, whose name is lost as she gave her father's name Mohammed Hassan instead of her own when she registered for work. Strict laws are now in place in Egypt to ensure that children are no longer employed to work on archaeological excavations, but this was commonplace in Petrie's time and not at all out of the ordinary. We wanted to tell this girl's story in the new display, who's also known as Tanis Girl because we don't know her real name. The fact that we don't have this information is also important for our understanding of the social structures in place at that time in Egypt, and hers is an important story to tell whether we know her name or not. One of the most well-known characters from Petrie's Egyptian workforce is this man, Ali Suwaifi. Ali was originally a farmer and fisherman from Lahoun, that's in the Fayum, just a little south from Cairo. He worked as Petrie's right-hand man on his excavations from 1891 to 1924. In that time, Ali became a skilled archaeologist and oversaw the work of Flinders Petrie's workforces all over Egypt. Ali Suwaifi's career as an archaeologist and leader in charge of Egyptian field workers spanned decades and numerous sites, and he trained many Egyptian workers in archaeological practice. In 1923, Suwaifi identified the earliest valley edge sites in the Badari area, and these have since given their name to the Badarian period of Egyptian prehistory. The object that we chose to display alongside Ali Suwaifi's story is this stunning gold amulet shown on the right-hand side of your screen. I can't see it because the pictures of us are hiding it, so I'm just going to move us. There we go. This object is one of the earliest and finest Egyptian examples of granulation, and that's the technique used on the surface of the object. For anyone who wonders, the object is about, the cylinder is about 6 centimeters long, so that's about the length of my thumb. And there are an incredible 3,600 tiny gold beads on its surface, each one individually soldered. I have to say that there are many objects in many museums that take my breath away, but this one is well up there as one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. The amulet was excavated from tomb 211 at Haraga, an incredible set of cemeteries located in the Fayum, which span everything from the pre-dynastic period all the way to the Coptic. And for anyone who doesn't really know Egyptian time periods, that's a lot of time. The excavation report published at the time says that we found a very fine cylinder amulet, but this belies the real finder of the object, who was, of course, Ali Suwaifi. Fortunately, the index card for tomb 211, held within the Petrie archives, documents this for us, so we're able to credit the object to him. Because of records like this, we know there are numerous other objects in the collection that were excavated by Ali, although the true number of objects is likely to be much higher than the number recorded. This is one of the things that makes the Petrie Museum's archive so incredibly valuable.
Okay, so another character is Margaret Murray. Margaret Murray was an archaeologist, a writer, a feminist, and a pioneer in the teaching of Egyptology. She taught at UCL's Department of Egyptology for over 40 years, and we tell her story in the new entrance gallery. Murray was one of Petrie's first students at UCL. She worked on his excavations in Egypt, and she also assisted with the care of the UCL Egyptian Museum collection. Importantly, she also undertook the teaching and administration of Petrie's Egyptology classes when he was away on field work, meaning that the department was still able to function well in his absence. Murray would have a profound influence over the next generation of Egyptologists who would continue to attribute their success to her. One of his students, Robert Faulkner, in his concise Dictionary of Middle Egyptian, which is still a core text for any student of Egyptian language, he made a dedication to Margaret Murray, that's in the center bottom here, He says, who taught me ancient Egyptian in gratitude and affection. This is my own beaten up copy of the book, which I like the idea that there's still a thread to Murray's teaching right through to when I learned ancient Egyptian language. Murray also championed the cause of women students and staff at UCL, demanding better and more equal facilities and working conditions. So we owe her a great deal for that.
During the aerial bombing of London in World War II, a direct hit gutted the Egyptology department at UCL. Luckily, some of the most important objects had already been sent to safe locations outside of London before the outbreak of war. A group of loyal staff and students packed the remaining objects into 160 tea chests and carried them down to the UCL basement in somewhat dangerous and frantic conditions. One of these student volunteers, Violette Lafleur, shown here, oversaw the hasty packing and removal of the tea chests, as well as the subsequent conservation of the collection after water damage. She did this at considerable personal risk as bombs were dropping around her, and her own home was destroyed in the Blitz as well. It was arduous work. There was a shortage of wood during the war, which meant that Lafleur had to make do and improvise with a series of drawers and trays. There were setbacks too. A bomb landed very nearby while she was working, and the water from firefighters' hoses seeped into the basement where the objects were stored, leaving them standing in water. The objects had to be unpacked, dried, and repacked again. Eventually, the objects were removed out of UCL and out of the centre of London to a secure location, and Violette Lafleur oversaw this work as well. By 1943, around 14 tons of crates and cases have been transported to safety. Incredible undertaking. It's because of Violette Lafleur's bravery, skillful conservation, and extraordinary work ethic that we are able to enjoy and study these remarkable objects today. But despite this, the story has not yet featured in a permanent display at the Petri Museum, and we're so pleased to have rectified this situation in our new entrance gallery, displaying her handwritten packing lists of objects for visitors to enjoy for the first time.
So another character who now features in the entrance gallery for the first time is Colonial Administrator of Sudan, Anthony Arkell. Arkell was honorary curator of the museum from 1948 to 1963. He led important excavations in Sudan in the 1940s that revealed early human activity in the area of Khartoum around 9,000 years ago, which he published as Early Khartoum. We now have this volume on display in the entrance gallery. As curator of the UCL Egyptian collection, Arkell obtained funds and supervised the design of new storage cupboards, which are in fact the current Petrie storage cupboards, and suitable showcases after World War II, many of which are still used today in the museum space. Arkell led the systematic unpacking of these 800 crates of objects packed by Violette Lafleur, each diligently checked off on Lafleur's register. Importantly, Arkell ensured preliminary conservation treatment for objects which had suffered during their time in storage during World War II. Arkell catalogued at least a third of the collection over 14 years, which is thousands of objects. It's a huge effort. It means a great deal to me as curator today. It makes my life a lot easier in many ways, so I'm very grateful to him for that. And many of his handwritten object labels are still on display today. In the entrance gallery, we now tell Arkell's story, but we also feature the story of Sudanese collection as well for the first time.
So on to Hilda Petrie. Hilda Petrie, née Erlin, was born in Dublin in 1871 and moved with her family to Sussex at the age of 4. Among many other things, she was an exceptional artist and developed a particular talent for copying, and it was for this reason that she was first introduced to Petrie, and I won't spoil the surprise, Anna. This photograph from the museum archive on the left of your screen shows Hilda in the field, where she would descend into tombs to copy the hieroglyphs and imagery and spend days in storerooms recording objects. Flinders Petrie relied on Hilda's drawings, plans, and documentation for his annual publications, and he says in one, "My wife drew all the plans besides doing much in sorting and arranging material." In addition, Hilda also directed excavations and oversaw, paid, and sometimes chose the workmen, speaking a little Arabic to communicate with the Egyptian workforce. Hilda also managed the project finances and the promotion of Flinders' work, which was vital in keeping their archaeological projects afloat. The Petries worked as a team on their excavations until Flinders Petrie's death in 1942, and Hilda by then was definitely an archaeologist in her own right. Without further ado, I will hand back to Anna to make the grand reveal of the newest object to enter the collection, and here she is.
So here we are, a big reveal. We've recently received a generous donation of a framed pencil study of a young woman's head, identified as Hilda Petrie when she was Hilda Erlin. This object was kindly donated by Dr. and Mrs. A. Douglas Tushingham. I'd like to thank them. I'd like to thank their daughter, Margot Tushingham, and I'd like to thank all of those who kindly advised on this acquisition. Over the past 12 months, the biography of this intriguing sketch has been reconstructed in preparation for its display. 3 key characters are associated with this drawing: the pre-Raphaelite artist, Henry Holiday, Hilda Erlin, and her husband, Flinders Petrie, whose life stories are closely linked. The pencil drawing of this seated girl, as it's described, was a study for Holiday's painting Aspasia on the Pnyx, which is painted in 1888. And the handwritten notes on the frame of this drawing indicate that Hilda Erlin was indeed the model for the head. The drawing has now been conserved, mounted and framed, and formally accessioned into the collection, and it will go on display in the entrance gallery as soon as is possible, and it's safe to do so in the new year. Henry Holiday was an English painter, a stained glass designer, an illustrator and sculptor who was proud to describe himself as a member of the pre-Raphaelite school of art. Holiday's works can be seen across the UK and beyond, including in the USA. Holiday was a friend of the Erlin family, and at the age of 17, Holiday persuaded the young Hilda, who was properly chaperoned in his London studio by her elder sisters, to sit as a model for his seated girl in this oil painting Aspasia on the Pnyx. So this is the character here to the right. In Holiday's eyes, Hilda's distinctly pre-Raphaelite features, later described as a heart-shaped face, clear blue eyes and fair hair, was the ideal contemporary type of beauty for Aspasia's young companion in the painting. Holiday's decision to use Hilda as a model for Aspasia's companion was to have a profound effect on Hilda's life, becoming the catalyst for the future direction of her career and of her personal life. Holiday and Flinders Petrie were well acquainted through Holiday's keen interest in Egypt. On a visit to UCL, Petrie made Holiday aware of his need for a skilled artist to work on a forthcoming monograph on ancient Egyptian costume. And Holiday thought of his young model for Aspasia, Hilda Erlin. So in Holiday's words, he describes this experience. Professor Petrie told me that he was writing a book on Egyptian costume, that he had made notes of all the engravings in the published works on Egypt, which he proposed to utilize for his illustrations, but that he wanted the cooperation of an artist who would add drawings and letterpress, treating the subject from the artistic point of view, as he had done from the historic. And he asked if I could find someone willing to do this. I thought over it, and I felt there could be no better means than this of acquiring an accurate knowledge of Egyptian costume, and I wrote that I should be much interested to do what he wanted myself. Upon which he sent me his manuscript and his notes of all the illustrations. One of the first things needed was to get tracings made from all the engravings referred to in the notes. And I told Professor Petrie that I knew a young lady who was keenly interested in Egypt and who would, I believed, be willing to undertake this task. This was my friend, Miss Hilda Erlin, who had sat for me for the head of the young girl in my picture of Aspasia. Miss Erlin readily consented. I took her to see Professor Petrie, and before many weeks had passed, she had made all the necessary tracings and brought them to me. So this chance meeting became the turning point in Flinders' life. And after gentle rebuffing from Hilda, over 2 years of courting, his marriage proposal was accepted on his return from Egypt in summer 1896. Holiday was evidently pleased about this development. He says, in November of the following year, 1897, Miss Erlyn became Mrs. Flinders Petrie. They spent the afternoon of November 23rd with us, married on the 29th, and went straight to Egypt. Mrs. Petrie's way of putting the matter was quaint. She said that she had long planned to save up her money till she was 40 and then go to Egypt. Now, she said, that's all knocked on the head. So thus began an important chapter in the lives of Hilda and Flinders, of the history of Egyptology at UCL, and of the management and organisation of Flinders' archaeological excavations by Hilda for the rest of his life. Hilda's story is now beautifully highlighted by this important new acquisition. It's hoped after seeing this drawing that future visitors will now leave the museum knowing something of Hilda's life story, as well as that of her better known husband.
So none of the work that you've seen here this afternoon would have been possible without the hard work of our collections care and conservation teams behind the scenes. Decanting the previous entrance gallery displays involved a major object move of around 500 papyrus frames, 75 bundles of archival material, and 60 stone inscriptions. You can see them here. In addition, we had to find space in stores and on display in the museum for 900 other objects from the former entrance gallery, an incredible feat. This work was coordinated by Frances Potts and Alice Williams, collections assistants, and I have just noticed Frances arrived, so hello Frances and welcome. This was also the first time that many of these stone objects had moved in several decades, so we took the opportunity to photograph the back of them for our conservation records. We discovered some interesting things, including one that was still labelled with Petrie London, and you might be able to just make that out on the middle photograph there. We think this was from its original shipping back from Egypt to UCL. We also carried out conservation on the objects in the entrance gallery and are fortunate to have two excellent in-house conservators, Amelia Kingham and Graham MacArthur. The first object that visitors see when they enter through the front door now is the plaster bust of Amelia Edwards, shown here. This has been non-destructively laser cleaned by Graham, and you can see him looking cheerful with his laser cleaner on the left. This bust was made by the British Museum for the UCL Egyptology Department in 1961, cast from Percival Ball's marble original. Because this bust was a plaster copy, it had been painted to make it seem more like real marble. But at some point in its history, the bust met with an unfortunate accident, and you can see in this photograph splatters of grey paint across the right shoulder and around the right-hand side of the base. This made it really hard to clean. Removing paint from a painted surface by the usual method of cleaning with solvents is extremely difficult to do, as the solvents are likely to affect the underlying paint that we want to preserve. In 2018, the department acquired a laser cleaning system specifically for use in cleaning objects like this one, where more typical methods can't be applied, and the finished object looks absolutely glorious.
We also use new technologies to share and research the collection, including our museum app, where you can learn more about the characters that we've described today. It's free to download, so you can go ahead and download that from the link that we'll share in the chat if you would like. We also have a selection of 3D printed objects that have been made as part of the entrance gallery redevelopment, which just adds an extra layer of accessibility for some of the objects on display. For both of these projects, we'd like to thank Think C3D, Llama Digital and Zaccato, and also Amanda Ford-Sporer for coordinating the 3D printing.
So just before we finished, I thought I would say that if, or hopefully when, you're planning your visit, here's some of our current really vastly reduced opening times. So at the moment, I think the last day we're open is this coming Saturday or possibly next Wednesday. From January, we'll be opening a little bit more. So Wednesday afternoon, Thursday afternoon, and Saturday afternoons, 1 till 5. This is ever changing, of course, in lockdown, and we're working to increase this. But in the meantime, we know that pre-booking is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. So please use the link on the screen to check whether you can visit. For anyone who hasn't visited yet, we're located on Mallet Place, which is parallel to Gower Street in Bloomsbury. And the best way to get into the museum entrance is via Torrington Place, opposite the really big Waterstones there. That's the best way into campus at the moment as well, because of the one-way system. Isn't 2020 brilliant? We really look forward to welcoming you there soon. And we hope that you've enjoyed this virtual visit to the Petri Museum. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Katrina, and to Anna. We've got a few minutes just to sort of get a few questions in, so I'll try and get through those. If anyone does need to leave, by all means, you're welcome to, but do leave a comment or give us your feedback of what you thought of this and how we could make it better in the future. But we hope you can stick around for just 5-10 minutes for a couple of questions. My first question, Anna, is when you had the idea of putting together this sort of new entrance of the museum, how did you go about identifying which characters you would highlight in that entrance exhibition?
That's a really good question. Yeah, thank you for asking that. So at the beginning, I mentioned some of our stakeholder groups. So one of these groups, what we called a kind of critical friends group. So this was made up of representatives from some of our stakeholder groups, including the Friends of the Petri Museum, and also Egyptian and Sudanese colleagues, UCL staff and students, who helped us to shape the stories that were being told in the entrance gallery. So it really was part of a wider conversation with these individuals, I would say, but also I have to say continues quite nicely the work that was done by Alice Stevenson and team in 2015 around the characters and collections for the centenary celebrations of the museum. That publication is available to download online for free. We'll try and add a link to the chat. I really recommend you reading that if you're interested in these characters and you'd like to learn more, but it was very much a kind of organic development from that project, I would say.
Yeah. How long did that take, the whole process, roughly?
I would say so. The consultation process took around 6 months. There were a few things got in the way slightly, including the UCU strikes. I was on strike for quite some time, which made things a bit tricky. But our groups were fantastic, and we were able to also engage with some of our stakeholders over the internet as well as meeting in person. So yeah, about 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. Now I can understand that this sort of the reason, one of the aims of doing this, sort of highlighting some of the stories of the characters, is acknowledging the kind of colonial legacy of the collection. Katrina, what other ways is the museum, what other methods of the museum using to try to acknowledge that even further, to try to make the public more aware, if they're not already, where this collection has come from?
Yeah, so pretty similar to what Anna was saying, that comes from a lot of research that's already been going on with the collection for some time. So people like Debbie Chalice and Kate Shepherd, Stephen Quirk, and Subhadra Das, some of the links that Anna's already shared. So we've organised various things through UCL Culture over the period of time, last 10 years or so, various exhibitions. For example, an exhibition called Curating Heads, and other ones in another one of our exhibition spaces at UCL. So yes, we've done various things and we continue to do what we can. And the main thing is that we, as you say, acknowledge these things front and center. And yeah, we just have to make it obvious that we know that context in everything that we do, I think. Anna, would you? No? Yeah,
go on, Anna.
I would absolutely agree, and I think we saw it as a really key part of our work for the new entrance gallery, to highlight these histories, these complex, in some ways controversial histories that have been explored before, as Katrina mentioned, but really to kind of put them in the spotlight. It's the first thing now that visitors will see as soon as they come into the museum. So that was a really key aspect of the project.
I just wanted to respond to two questions that came up, if that's okay. I've just seen two really good. So Kate has said, please don't ever make the Petri Museum shiny and modern. I just wanted to say that I really want to underline how much we all adore the style of the Petri Museum. That's not something that we're aiming to do. We like to have a mixture of things. So we have different interpretive methods that suit different people. So the entrance gallery is done in a much more kind of shiny and modern style, deliberately as an introductory space to help people access what's in the rest of the museum. But the rest of the museum is really beautiful. It's really unusual, and the volume of objects is something you don't see very often. We have about 10% of the collection on display, which is enormous. It doesn't sound much, but it is compared to many museums. It's almost our USP. And then the other question I wanted to reply to is from Steph. Which says, how come the museum was the first in the world to catalogue the whole collection? And is the collection still being added to? So the answer to the first question is because there were some fabulous members of staff in the museum around 2000, I think 2001. So Sally MacDonald and Stephen Quirk were there, and many others. I'm sorry if I don't know everyone's names. And they developed this project to catalogue and get everything online. It was really unusual, and it's been incredibly important this year. We've benefited from it so much. We don't generally add to the collection. We don't add archaeological objects. Very rarely would we do that unless there was something that was clearly originally part of the set of objects we already have. And even then, we'd probably think twice. We don't acquire things from auction specifically. But we do occasionally acquire things where they relate to the archaeologists or the stories, the people involved in the collection, hence the Hilda portrait. So something more archival or similar might be added. Thank you.
Yeah, can I ask, does the collection relate to the Egyptology collection of the British Museum? Do you guys talk to each other or lend things to each other?
We have things, and I'll try and unmute you. Yeah, we have something on display semi-permanently at the British Museum, but yeah, Anna.
We do, and we have a good working relationship with the BM. I worked there for about 5 years, so I'm fortunate to be able to maintain that relationship with our friends up the road. They're 5 minutes away. It makes total sense that we should maintain that relationship. But yeah, Katrina's right. We do that through we loan objects. We've in the past organised events together. So yeah, there's a really good working relationship there, and it's something that we hope to continue in the future.
Fantastic. And final question to both of you is, which of these characters are your favourite and why?
Oh, that's so hard.
That's so really hard. That's a cruel question to ask at the end. Go ahead, Katrina.
Oh, Anna, you're so mean. I have it's so hard. I have a real soft spot for Violette Lafleur, which is probably because I might relate to her as a person. So I suspect that's partly why. But I think partly because I've worked with so many, I've been a volunteer in a museum myself, and I've worked with so many museum volunteers. I see their dedication and what they would do for the collections that they care about. And I know many volunteers who would have done similar things as Violette, probably, I hope. But I just think, yeah, I relate to her dedication and the things that she did. But it's really hard. It's very hard to choose. So, Anna.
I agree. It's really, really tricky. I would say that Ali Swafi for me is certainly up there. And again, it's another one of these people that we just wouldn't have the collection without Ali Swafi. But I have to say, I'm really passionate about Sudanese archaeology, as well as Egyptian archaeology. And so to kind of reveal more of the story around Anthony Arkell and his impact, not only at UCL with the Petrie collection, but also in Sudan. He helped to set up the national, what is now the National Museum of Sudan in Khartoum. And so to be able to kind of tell more of the stories around Sudanese archaeology, using Arkell's kind of, drawing on his own personal story is really a pleasure for me.
That's fantastic. Well, look, I think we could go on, and I know there's a whole big question around these objects and how they were acquired and whether we should still keep them. It's a very big debate, and that's something that needs to be addressed in a separate conversation. Today is all about hearing the stories of the people who helped put this exhibition together, this collection together. And it's wonderful. I think I haven't seen the Petrie exhibition. I haven't seen the museum. So now when I get the chance to be able to walk through the doors and see this collection, I'll see it in a very different light. And so will most people, because we know the stories of the people who put this together. So it's really insightful. What a wonderful idea. Thank you for sharing this with us, both Anna and Katrina. We really appreciate it. But thank you both for your time. Thank you everyone for being a part of this. We'll let you all go now, 5 minutes before your next meeting or your next event or whatever it is. But have a lovely afternoon. This is our last private view of the year. So let me also wish you all best wishes for Christmas and the new year. And we look forward to seeing everyone in 2021, hopefully with in safer times, who knows. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Take care.